The Thuringian Agency for Skilled Personnel Marketing presents this input on residence titles for international students and graduates. One aspect of our work is to support people who are searching for a job, a vocational training, or an internship in Thuringia. In personal consultations and various events, we offer information and tips on job search and application. At our Thuringian Job and Career Fair, potential skilled workers can get to know Thuringian employers. The TAF is funded by the Free State Thuringia. We would like to point out our disclaimer. This presentation provides non-binding information. The TAF does not offer any legal advice. Legal advice is only available with lawyers, and binding decisions are reserved for the immigration authorities. This input contains information on the basic concepts, regulations, and requirements for student residence titles in Germany. After a short introduction related to the basics, we will talk about the options that international students have to transit from a temporary title to a permanent permit. At the end of the input, we will talk about the working regulations for international students and graduates. Be aware that this presentation is based on the German Residence Act from March 1st, 2020 and the reform of the law effective from March 2024. Let me explain some basic concepts. There is a difference between visa, residence title, and settlement permit. The visa authorizes entry to Germany, for example, for a visit or to take up studies. The residence permit enables a longer stay in Germany for a specific purpose, and the settlement permit allows permanent residence in Germany. The entry to Germany for the purpose of studying is therefore initially carried out with a corresponding national visa. The visa states the validity, the purpose of the stay, as well as the possible access to the labor market. In our example, we see a Schengen visa for a tourist or business trip without work permission. Now let's take a closer look at the residence permit. Similar to a visa, we can see the validity. That means until when the residence permit is valid, and the purpose of the stay. The purpose of your stay indicates why you are in Germany, for example, to study. The purpose of residence is based on the relevant regulations in the Residence Act. Together with the additional sheet shown on the right-hand side, the residence permit also contains information on access to the labor market. For access to the labor market, there are various wordings in the residence permit and the additional sheet that indicate whether you are allowed to work, and if so, what types of activities are permitted and to what extent. What wordings are used and what do they mean? We have translated some important terms for you. You can find the shown wordings on the additional sheet. What is permitted or not permitted depends on the purpose of your stay. For example, international students from a so-called third country may only be employed for 140 full or 280 half days per year, unless it is a necessary internship or a student assistant job. Self-employed activities are also permitted but require the approval of the Foreigners Office. Legal requirements must be met before a residence permit can be issued. In addition to the specific requirements according to the purpose of residence, green field on the right, the general requirements for issuing a residence permit in accordance with Section 5 of the German Residence Act must be observed. These general requirements apply to all purposes of stay. The general requirements are: first, proof of secure financial means of livelihood. The means of subsistence can be secured by means of a scholarship, a blocked account, or a declaration of commitment for the entire period of residence or study. Securing your livelihood also includes sufficient health insurance. You will also need a valid passport and a valid visa or residence permit. Furthermore, proof of residence in Thuringia must be provided. To do this, you will need confirmation of registration from the local authorities, as well as a rent contract and confirmation of moving in by the landlord, a so-called Einzugsbestätigung. The other requirements, according to Section 5 of the Residence Act, include that no criminal offenses have been committed. What steps can international students take to obtain a permanent residence permit in Germany? Let's take a look at the most important steps. Step 1. You start your studies. Only if your studies are completed do you have the option of applying for another residence permit. First option after graduation if you have not yet found qualified employment. This means a job that usually requires a university degree or qualified vocational training. In this case, you can apply for a residence permit for job search. This residence permit, according to Section 20 of the Residence Act, can only be applied for directly after graduation for a maximum duration of 18 months. It may happen that your current residence permit for the purpose of studying has already expired, but the new one you have applied for is not yet ready. In this case, the responsible foreigners office will issue a fictional certificate. Please note that the same conditions apply in the fictional certificate as in the previous residence title. In our example, you are still considered a student and may only work 140 full or 280 half days. It is important to note that holding the aforementioned residence titles for the purpose of studying and job seeking does not allow you to apply for a settlement permit, regardless of how long you have been in Germany. Only when you have a residence permit for the purpose of employment does your so-called qualitative period begin. This means this period is taken into account when applying for a settlement permit. If you have found qualified employment directly after your studies and have received an employment contract, the second option is relevant for you. In this case, you apply directly for a residence permit under Section 18b of the Residence Act for the purpose of employment or the EU Blue Card after completing your studies. These residence permits are tied to the respective employer. Every time you take up a new job, you should inform the relevant foreigners office in good time and have the details in the additional sheet changed. The change to a residence permit for the purpose of employment also takes place if you have found qualified employment during the job search period after your studies. After a minimum period of uninterrupted employment subject to Social Security contributions, you can apply for a settlement permit. For international graduates of German universities, this is possible after 24 months with a residence permit in accordance with Section 18b of the Residence Act. It is important that all requirements for the granting of a settlement permit are met, that is, not only the number of months in employment subject to Social Security contributions, but also language skills, sufficient living space, and other specific and general requirements. EU Blue Card holders are a special case here. If you have any questions on this topic, please contact us. You will be informed about the different residence titles and the respective requirements by your immigration office when you apply for the respective residence permit. The information can also be found in several languages at makeitingermany.de, the official website for qualified professionals. Sometimes life turns out differently than planned. So what happens if you can't continue your studies in Germany? There are several options to change from a residence permit for the purpose of studying to other purposes. Section 16b, subsection 4 of the Residence Act provides for a change only for the following purposes. First, to start a qualified vocational training. Second, to employment as a skilled worker. To do this, you need a training or study qualification recognized in Germany. For example, a bachelor's degree from your country of origin. Third, employment with extraordinary professional experiences in accordance with Section 19c, subsection 2 of the Residence Act. Keep in mind that you should be able to demonstrate very specific experience and qualifications as well as a public interest, in particular a regional, economic or labor market policy interest. And fourth, a change of purpose is also possible in cases of legal entitlement, for example, with a marriage. As already mentioned, you may not switch directly from the student residence title to the settlement permit. In this last part of the input, we want to have a look on the working regulations for international students and graduates. As mentioned above, you can work 140 full days or 280 half days per calendar year with a residence permit for study purposes. So-called student auxiliary tasks are not subject to this time limit. Student auxiliary tasks include, for example, academic tasks at a university or at a non-university research institution. What is important here is the connection to your studies. A job at a student union, for example in the cafeteria, is not a student auxiliary activity. Compulsory internships during your studies are also permitted without restrictions. If you want to work on a self-employed basis or if you want to work more, you need the approval of the Foreigners Office and, if applicable, the employment agency. It will be checked whether the activity makes it more difficult or delays the successful completion of your studies. As the main purpose of your stay is to study, you are not legally entitled to approval. You have two options for starting your working life in Germany after completing your studies. If you have not yet found qualified employment, you can obtain a residence permit for the purpose of seeking employment in accordance with Section 20 of the Residence Act. This residence title can only be applied for directly after completing your studies and is valid for 18 months. It is not possible to extend the duration. During these 18 months, you can work in any field to finance your living costs. If you have found qualified employment, meaning a job for which you need qualified vocational training or an university degree, then you can apply for a residence permit for the purpose of employment in accordance with Section 18b of the Residence Act. If your gross annual earnings are above a certain limit, you can also obtain an EU Blue Card. The current earnings limits can be found online on the websites of the relevant authorities. International graduates of German universities have the option of applying for a settlement permit after 24 months of employment subject to social security contributions. In addition to the duration of employment, it is important that other requirements according to Sections 9 and 18c of the Residence Act are also fulfilled. Further information on all residence titles can be found on the makeitingermany.de portal or from the responsible Foreigners Office. Finally, please note once again our disclaimer regarding the content of this input. Do you have questions concerning residence titles for international students and graduates? Further information, event notes, and counseling services are available on our webpage. Thank you for your attention.